Today we are going to be looking at ADHD TikTok. Woo! Well, hello there. Welcome to my channel. My name is Kristen, and if you're new here, I just want to let you know that on this channel I talk about social issues and cultural issues, and I usually look at things through a lens of pop culture, but not always. I make videos every Wednesday, so if you would like to stick around and hear what else I have to say, please do consider subscribing. Anyway, let's get started with the video. So today I wanted to do something a little bit topical. It's related to the reason why I've been putting off the video that I've been planning to make for a few weeks now, kind of a culmination of some of the other little video essays I've been making. And I don't know what it is, I just keep not making that video and coming up with other stuff I'd rather talk about. So today I thought I'd pick a topic that's related to why that keeps happening. So I'm gonna do a long intro. Based on the title or the thumbnail, you probably already know where I'm going with this, but I'm still gonna act like you don't. So I have a disorder, an executive functioning disorder, and it affects a lot of things around motivation, as well as planning, memory, etc. The biggest way that it affects me, at least in terms of this YouTube channel, is that for me to be able to write a script, film a video, and edit it, it has to be something I'm really interested in and that I just really want to make it for some reason. And you know, if I don't feel it, if I'm not feeling the vibes, I won't end up doing the video. I just won't. Some other things that help motivate me are knowing that somebody else is relying on me, having a deadline, you know, there being stakes involved, things like that. So when something is completely self-motivated, like my YouTube channel, you know, the only real motivator I have is I feel like talking about something, and I told myself I would make a video every week. You know, that's all I've got. So when I have a video topic that I had been wanting to make, but now suddenly something in me just doesn't feel like doing it, it's really, really hard for me to actually buckle down and make the video. So that won't be this week. Maybe next week I'll actually do it, but this week I want to talk a little bit about that executive functioning disorder that I mentioned. So I already mentioned that it can affect my motivation and my ability to get certain things done. It also can affect long-term planning. It affects working memory, which has the impact of me being really horrible with names and faces, almost to like an insulting extent. I can meet somebody multiple times and really like them, but their name just doesn't stick. I don't know why. I mean, I do know why, but I also don't know why. It can also affect social issues, like growing up, people with this disorder tend to be socially delayed, and so it can make us not everybody's favorite person, you know what I mean? Like, a lot of people with this disorder end up being bullied, or just not having a lot of friends, or having kind of, you know, not long-lasting friendships, especially in childhood, because you are often 1 or 2 years behind your peers in terms of your social development. So yeah, but all of this can sound kind of serious, especially the stuff about not really being able to get things done and having trouble organizing things. But I do want to underline that with proper treatment, with like a treatment plan and strategies that help provide structure, and the kinds of motivational things that do work, like stakes, deadlines, you know, breaking things into smaller chunks, with all of that in place, I can be just as productive as anybody else. And I'm a very good worker. I'm good at what I do. I just need to make sure that I am methodical and cognizant of the way I structure my work life so that I'm able to be successful. I want to get into the theory behind why this disorder happens before I talk more specifically about what the disorder is. The theory is that in our brains, we have 2 types of dopamine levels. We have our tonic dopamine levels, which is the dopamine that just kind of floats around in your brain all the time and helps you get things done. It helps you expect rewards and kind of motivates you to do stuff. And then there's what's called phasic dopamine, which is released in response to a stimuli that the brain finds rewarding. And so people with my disorder, we have lower levels of tonic dopamine floating around in our brain. At least that's what they think is happening. They can't exactly cut open a living person's brains and measure their dopamine levels. So, you know, it is still a theory, not necessarily fact, but the theory is that we have lower levels of tonic dopamine, and our brains compensate for this by having higher levels of phasic dopamine. So our brains respond to stimuli more strongly than a neurotypical person's brain would. And this has the effect of making it so that people with my disorder tend to seek out new stimuli. We want stuff to give us that phasic dopamine so that our dopamine levels can get more right. You know what I mean? Like with the low levels of tonic dopamine, we tend to feel understimulated, and we need something to kind of give us our dopamine, basically. And so that's kind of what I was referencing when I said, with a proper treatment plan, I can be just as effective as anybody else. So, with certain medicines, you can increase your levels of tonic dopamine, and then your brain has to rely less on the phasic dopamine to get dopamine, for example. That's a little bit about the neuroscience behind it. Because this is a disorder, it usually is spoken about in a negative way. However, at least for me, there are some positive aspects. So being neurodivergent, I tend to think a little bit differently than other people. I am very good at thinking creatively and at problem solving in ways that other people might not think of. And so it makes me able to have a unique perspective, and it can make me a good contributor, especially in brainstorming areas of a project. And so I just wanted to highlight that there are positives to the disorder, but it is still a disorder, It's not like a superpower, but it can make me a creative person and a really good contributor to a team. Of course, the disorder I'm talking about is ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. This is a disorder that is often thought of as something that young boys have that makes them disruptive in class, kind of jumpy, kind of loud, more likely to interrupt people. And the common understanding is that you grow out of it. So it's really something only kids have, and it's usually only boys have. And of course, both of these things are untrue. If somebody has ADHD, you don't really grow out of it. You might grow up and find that your symptoms no longer impact your life in a way that makes you qualify for the diagnosis, but your brain is still different from other people's. Like you're still neurodivergent, you're still, you still have ADHD qualities, even if you don't necessarily qualify for like the DSM, diagnosis. And it's also often in girls, just as often as it is in boys. And this stereotype that it's only boys have it and it only affects school has created a lot of negative biases and perceptions about ADHD that have hurt people with ADHD, because girls like me often go undiagnosed into adulthood, or they never get diagnosed, or they find out they have ADHD when their own daughter gets diagnosed with ADHD and the doctor asks to talk to the parent too, because it often runs in families, though not always. And so this big misunderstanding about what ADHD is and how it actually affects people, people thinking that it really only impacts school, when actually it impacts your social life, it impacts your home life, it impacts your work life, it impacts everything. These misconceptions have been kind of busted in the last couple years by online content creators. People on Twitter and YouTube making content about having ADHD and what it's like and ways that it affects you that you don't necessarily always think about. And this has been a very good thing. This has helped a lot of people understand that, ADHD is not just something that makes it hard to sit still in school. It actually is an executive functioning disorder that affects many areas of life, including school often. In recent years, the online conversation about ADHD has been increasingly led by people who actually have ADHD. I first noticed this on Twitter when the account ADHD Alien was publishing their comics that they made about their experience with ADHD. And they really talked about the broad range of experiences that you can have as somebody with ADHD, instead of just the typical young boy is jumpy and interrupts people. They talked a lot more about the way it can impact girls and the way it can impact your self-esteem and the way it can impact your social life. And there were other Twitter accounts doing this as well, but ADHD Alien is who stands out to me. And I also saw this happening on YouTube with accounts like How to ADHD, which she's a girl or woman, and she talks about her experience as a woman with ADHD and has a lot of really good informational videos about how to manage your ADHD and different ways that you can approach your treatment plan. And so both of those creators, I encourage you checking out. They make really good stuff. And they're just two examples of this broader phenomenon of people online talking about ADHD with more nuance and kind of myth busting and really speaking to their own experiences as somebody with ADHD, which in my opinion has been a really good thing. And this past summer, I joined TikTok, as a lot of people did during lockdown. And I noticed that this conversation was happening on TikTok too. There's a whole little, section of TikTok, you can call it ADHD talk, ADHD TikTok, whatever you want to call it, where people are doing a lot of the same stuff. But it's different on TikTok because TikTok is a different app that lends itself towards different types of content. And so on TikTok, the videos can be a maximum of 1 minute long, and videos that are 15 seconds tend to do better because they're faster, they can go more viral, stuff like that. So on TikTok, you're really encouraged to make small, self-contained, bite-sized chunks. Your videos, you can make threads and series, sort of. Like, you can tell people this is part 1, make sure you check out part 2, and so on and so forth. But it's not like Twitter, where Twitter will group everything in a thread together, so it's very easy to just scroll down and read it as you're going through the timeline. And it's not like YouTube, where you can make a long form video, or you can make a playlist and have a bunch of videos in a series. TikTok, it's not designed for that kind of content. And so necessarily the stuff that gets on TikTok that gets most popular is stuff that is short, bite-sized, doesn't reference any other video, and it's just supposed to be consumed by itself. And what this means is that nuance that I was mentioning about the conversations on Twitter and YouTube really can't exist on TikTok, at least not in the same ways. And in my opinion, this has some mixed effects, and that's what I want to talk about today. Because of the nature of TikTok and the types of content that get rewarded by the TikTok algorithm, the types of content that gets a creator boosted and gets their stuff in front of other people, people are incentivized on TikTok to make a certain type of content. You're incentivized to make stuff that can overgeneralize. You're incentivized to rapidly share, lists of facts all in succession, because the faster you talk, the more interesting it is for people a lot of the time. You're encouraged to make things that are self-contained, because again, connecting videos and making things that require watching your previous videos in a series can hurt your analytics, because people who don't feel like going to your profile and finding the original video in the series, they're just going to skip past your video, and that's going to impact your reach. So TikTok is not designed for nuance. It's not designed really for education, at least not in any level other than at the surface. And that affects the types of content that gets made and that gets popular. The use of disclaimers, referencing previous work, sharing links and resources, all of that is disincentivized on TikTok. And TikTok also encourages making big claims, because a big claim is what's going to provoke a reaction, which is going to tell the algorithm that your video was good and people liked it. So you're not always going to be saying reasonable, well-known stuff. You're going to want to make a claim that's a little bit fantastical, because that is more likely to excite the viewer. And lastly, on TikTok, you're not really incentivized to provide disclaimers or any kind of alternate explanations for things. Like, there's a lot of content on TikTok that says, like, if X, Y, and Z apply to you, that means you must be A. And really, you could also be B, C, D, or E, but TikTok doesn't have room for nuance. It doesn't promote having nuance. So it just doesn't really make it on TikTok as much. Also on TikTok, you want to make sure that you are maximizing your reach. So content that can go viral is content that everybody can relate to. But if you're an ADHD educator on TikTok and you want to go viral, that means you kind of have a weird choice, where you can try to make stuff that is specific to the ADHD experience and that will be relatable to people with ADHD, and thus you will be limiting your reach. Or you can make content that is relatable to everyone, to a broader experience, and this will increase your reach, but it will dilute your message and possibly confuse people into thinking they have ADHD. And that's one of the problems that I see on ADHD TikTok. So I took a look at some of the top ADHD TikToks. I looked at about 30 videos or so, and I noticed some broad trends. I noticed what I would call 3 kind of broad categories for the types of ADHD TikToks that exist. So let's talk about those. I am absolutely going to be referencing my notes for this section of the video, so just be aware. I will be looking at a piece of paper some. So in my mind, the first kind of big category of ADHD TikTok content is the good kind. This is educational content made either by practitioners like a therapist or by people who actually have ADHD. It's often less flashy, and it doesn't necessarily do as big of numbers, especially the therapist made content. I saw one therapist on the top TikTok ADHD videos that I looked at out of 30. So they really get drowned out by the other creators. This type of ADHD content tends to dispel myths about ADHD, share about the ADHD experience, highlight lesser known facts about ADHD, and it explains how an ADHD brain is different from a neurotypical brain. The key here to what I would consider the good ADHD content is that it doesn't share half-truths or things without context. It doesn't necessarily convince somebody who doesn't have ADHD that they might have ADHD. That's what I would consider something good. And again, the problem with TikTok and the way that TikTok is set up, it's very easy to set out to make this type of content, the good kind, that is educational and that dispels myths and, shares about the experience of someone with ADHD. But you can accidentally slip into what I would consider the confusing or mixed kind of ADHD content because you don't always achieve your goal, right? So let's talk about that second category, the confusing, mixed results kind of ADHD TikTok. These adopt an educational aesthetic. They are presumably designed to be educational by the creators, but these content can be a little bit confusing. They often look at symptoms of ADHD that really can't always be considered symptoms because, they could be related to a number of things, not necessarily ADHD. And they sometimes will talk about disorders that are often comorbid with ADHD, like anxiety, depression, insomnia, etc. And this content, it just misses the mark. They are trying to be educational, but in my opinion, they are sharing misinformation a lot of the time. So this type of content might list symptoms associated to many other conditions, including ADHD, but they will present it as though it's only a symptom of ADHD, and if you have this symptom, you have ADHD, when that's not necessarily true. They might also list symptoms of comorbidities, like anxiety, depression, or insomnia, and try to say that actually this is just ADHD, it was ADHD all along, and that's not always true. See, ADHD can cause depression, ADHD can cause anxiety, and ADHD can cause insomnia, but you still have depression, anxiety, or insomnia, even if ADHD was the cause. But a lot of these videos make it out like it's just ADHD. Depression is a symptom of ADHD, and that's not true. It's just not. And these types of videos also may list just random stuff as symptoms of ADHD, and these things might be related to somebody's ADHD, but they might also be related to a different disorder or to just somebody's personality, and they aren't in the diagnostic criteria because they aren't good criteria for differentiating ADHD from other stuff. So, for example, a lot of people will list stuff that autistic people relate to as being symptoms of ADHD, and those things very well may be symptoms of ADHD, but they might also be symptoms of autism. So when you present it as if it's only a symptom of ADHD, that's confusing as heck to all your autistic viewers and a lot of neurotypical people who might also relate to those kinds of symptoms, even though they don't actually have any kind of disorder. I also noticed that some of this content, it speaks to the ADHD experience, and it uses vocabulary that helps people, talk about their ADHD. And so in some ways, that's why I said it was kind of mixed and confusing, because the content can have a good effect. If you are somebody with ADHD and you're consuming this stuff that says it's for people with ADHD and you relate to it, that's probably good for you. But it's not good for people who don't have it, who now think that they might have it when they might not. And so, yeah, it has a mixed impact. And in my opinion, it can cause people to be confused about their own diagnoses. It can make people think they have something when they don't have it, or think that they don't actually have something when they do. Like I mentioned with anxiety and depression, I've seen a lot of TikToks saying, you don't have anxiety, you just have ADHD. And it's like, it can be both. It can be both. You can have both. And because there's no room for nuance on TikTok, that's just not what gets popular. That's not what does numbers. And so that's the second category. It's like I said, it's trying to be educational, and in some ways it is educational, but it's just also confusing and might lead people to falsely believe they have a disorder that they don't actually have. Now, the third type of ADHD content on TikTok, I would say it's the bad kind. It's just bad. And I notice this a little more often than I wish I had, where it's just there's a lot of people who are using the ADHD tags on TikTok to sell you something. There are people with affiliate codes doing non-disclosed ads for products, ostensibly because they help people with ADHD. And, they say like link in bio, and you go look at their bio, you go find the link, and it's a link to Amazon that has a referral code. So they're going to get a cut of any purchase made through that link. But did they disclose that it was an ad? No, they didn't. They just presented it like, I have ADHD and this helps me. It'll help you too. I'm linking this to be helpful, not because I'm making money. And I just think that's kind of icky not to disclose that something is an ad and that you are benefiting off the people who go buy the thing that you referenced them to. Especially when you consider that people with ADHD tend to have impulse control problems. We can struggle with impulse shopping, for example, because shopping gives you dopamine, and people who have ADHD are often needing more dopamine. So it seems like you're weaponizing our disorder against us. It's gross. It really is. And then there's also people who are basically just life coaches, which, by the way, there's no certification for a life coach. The only real way to vet a life coach is to, I guess, interview a bunch of their clients or to actually pay them money and evaluate their services. There's no standard for evaluating a life coach before you actually start working with them. So for me, that's a problem. It's not like a therapist where they had to go to school and they are accredited and blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of life coaches on TikTok who call themselves ADHD coaches.
Quick disclaimer, I'm going to go pretty hard on ADHD coaches. I just want to say that if you happen to be an ADHD coach on TikTok and you and I are mutuals, this is not about you. Most of your content, in my opinion, falls into the category of the good kind. But I didn't really have a good way of differentiating between good and bad coaches because, again, there's no real certification. So I just want you to know I'm not calling you out. If you are watching this, you know who you are, and I love your content. So yeah.
And they say, they can help you with your ADHD. We'll turn your ADHD into a superpower. ADHD is great, actually, and if you pay me money, I can tell you why. It's weird. It's really weird. And it's people presenting themselves as experts when they have no real accreditation that they can reference. And so that's kind of why I lump the advertisers and the life coaches together in the bad category, because they're all just trying to sell you something. They just want to make money off you, and they want to use the fact that you have ADHD against you. And so that's gross, right? Like, objectively gross. So just to kind of summarize and reiterate, the three broad categories of ADHD TikTok that I referenced are the good kind, which are made by practitioners, people who actually have ADHD, and it's educational content that is made in a way that speaks to the ADHD experience, explains things about ADHD that people might not understand, and it myth busts things related to ADHD, but it's not confusing, and it doesn't make people who don't actually have ADHD think they have it, or make people who have other disorders think that they don't actually have those. That's the good kind of content. The confusing or mixed kind of content it's aiming to be the good educational kind, but the way they go about it, because of the way TikTok incentivizes you to make content, it is confusing. It's made to be relatable to more than just people with ADHD, because that's what's going to do numbers. And as a result, it speaks to people with ADHD, which is a good thing, but it also speaks to people who don't have it and makes them think they do. And that's a problem, obviously, because, we want people to have the appropriate diagnosis so that they can get the help that they actually need. That's the second category, the confusing kind. The third category, in my opinion, is just obviously pernicious. It's people who are trying to use ADHD as a marketing tool. They're using the ADHD TikTok tags. They're using the phrase ADHD. They are trying to use this disorder as a way to make money because they want to either sell you a product or they want to sell you their own services. In either way, I just don't find it very trustworthy or credible when somebody with no accreditation tells you that they are an ADHD coach and they can turn your ADHD into a superpower. Like, that's weird, right? So those are the three categories. You got good, mixed, and bad. And as you might notice, there's only one good category and there's two kind of bad categories. So overall, the ADHD content on TikTok, while most of it's relatable to me because I actually have ADHD, I don't know if it's having an overall good effect on everybody on TikTok because most people don't have ADHD. And I think it's a problem if there's a big community of people who are making content that can confuse people into thinking they have a disorder that they might not have. That's not to say I think ADHD TikTok is all bad, right? Like, I don't think it's all bad. It's just that the shortcomings of the TikTok app and the types of content that TikTok incentivizes creators to make, they don't lend themselves well to educating people. So ADHD TikTok has done good things. It helps create a sense of community for people who have ADHD. It's given a way for us to connect with each other and hear about each other's experiences and share about our own and feel validated and heard by other people. And that's good. That's a good thing. And people who have ADHD TikTok can help you better understand your ADHD. It can introduce you to new vocabulary that you might not have already known about and then give you kind of the tools you need to go do independent research. But because there's so much confusing content and there's so much content that's just blatantly trying to sell people stuff, I think it's important to really encourage using your media literacy skills when you are on TikTok, and especially when you're on ADHD TikTok. You need to make sure that you're considering the medium, considering the bias and motivations of the creator that you're watching, and use discernment when you are watching videos. When somebody lists a bunch of facts in rapid fire but doesn't cite their sources, you should probably pause and go look up those facts to see if you can verify them, because otherwise those are going to sit around in your brain and you're just going to think it's true. You need to be suspicious of people if they're trying to sell you something. I'm sure not every ADHD coach on TikTok is bad, but I just don't trust most of them, frankly. Kind of like the biggest thing here is that TikTok cannot be the only place that you go for education about any topic, especially ADHD, because the types of content that are on TikTok, it's going to be stuff that lacks nuance and that doesn't necessarily cite its sources and that can be misleading. And that's just because of the app. That's because of the types of content that TikTok itself incentivizes people to make. So it's not that these individual creators are intentionally doing all of this stuff with malice, except maybe the people who are trying to sell you something. I don't trust their intentions. But for the most part, people are trying to be educational and they just also want to get popular on TikTok. So those priorities kind of compete with each other and they have to weigh the pros and cons of different strategies in order to achieve success while also still educating. So what that kind of means is TikTok can be a place to introduce you to concepts and give you vocabulary, but you need to go do other research. You need to take what you've heard on TikTok and then go look and see what the actual scholarship and studies say. You want to make sure that you're seeking out longer form content in addition to what you're seeing on TikTok. So I mentioned Twitter threads and YouTube videos, but also articles are very good. Books are even better. Or even just focusing on the content creators who are actually therapists is probably a good way to make sure you're getting good, reliable information, as opposed to just the people who have ADHD. That's not to say you shouldn't listen to the people who say they have ADHD, but it's just they don't have a license that they want to protect. You know what I mean? If I get up and I spout nonsense about ADHD that confuses a bunch of people, there's not going to be anything that happens to me. I have nothing to fear. But a therapist who gets up and does that, they could face professional consequences. So the stakes are higher for them, which means their content inherently is going to be more vetted because they have to worry about their reputation as a therapist. So I would encourage you to focus on those kinds of resources over ADHD TikTok made by people who say they have ADHD. So ADHD TikTok isn't going away. People aren't going to stop looking at it. The algorithm is not going to stop showing me videos about it, especially after all the research I did for this. But I think the real key here is to make sure that you're exercising your media literacy muscles. It's a skill that you can build and that you have to maintain. And so that's stuff that I already mentioned, thinking about possible bias of a creator, thinking about their motivation, thinking about who is their intended audience, what's their goal with this piece of content, and thinking about, what ways could this be misleading? What things should I fact check? What rhetorical strategies are being employed? Are they, using hyperbole? Are they making big, bold claims because they know that people are going to be too lazy to look it up? Ask yourself those questions. And if that sounds exhausting and it sounds like something you don't really want to do on TikTok, yeah, it kind of is. You don't go to TikTok to have to use your brain. You go to TikTok to have your brain melted. So with that in mind, that's kind of why I don't think TikTok is a great place to do most educational work. I think maybe if you want to just scroll past some of those TikToks to tell the algorithm I'm not interested, that probably would be the wisest thing if you don't want to have to keep your brain on when you're using the app. But if not, you really do need to pause videos, read comments, look for them to have link to source, go to Google, leave the app, go research the claims that people are making, because otherwise you're going to have a bunch of misinformation bouncing around in your head, and you might get confused into thinking you have ADHD. You might get confused into thinking you don't have ADHD. You might have somebody confuse you into thinking, oh, I don't actually have depression, I only have ADHD. And all of those things are bad. We want people to have accurate diagnoses and have a good understanding of themselves. And I think a lot of the ADHD TikTok content it doesn't promote that. And I think that's a problem. So yeah, just another thing to think about here is that TikTok is not designed for you to use your critical thinking skills. It is designed for you to endlessly swipe. And it doesn't encourage thinking about what you're looking at. And so it's hard to use your media literacy skills when you're on TikTok, but you need to. You need to be intentional. Yeah. Thank you so much if you watched this video, especially if you got this far. I really appreciate everybody who takes the time to hear what I have to say. And yeah, if you got this far, I hope you will consider subscribing. I make videos every Wednesday, even though my ADHD wants me to stop sometimes. Yeah, I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.